So let's go through some of these Super Tuesday states. So you have all the data you need. And you can play with these numbers yourself. One of the fun things to do if you're very bored at work today is you can go, there are a bunch of delegate calculators, and you can go in and you can sort of estimate what percentage of the vote you think various candidates are going to win in a lot of these states. Okay, so the big prize on Super Tuesday is, of course, California. The problem is that the polls don't close until 8 p.m. Pacific time, and we're not even going to see results in California until very late. So that cuts in favor of Joe Biden. Why? Because that is Bernie's biggest winning state, right? If Bernie does real well in California, we're not going to know it until the next day. You're really not going to know it. So that means that if Biden shows a lot of momentum in the other states, then he could get a lot of big headlines out of Super Tuesday night because, again, the biggest prize on the map is Bernie. For Bernie is California, and California is going to show up really late, like 11 p.m. Eastern is when the polls close. So Latinos are expected to make about 30% of the electorate. Sanders won Latinos overwhelmingly in Nevada. The suggestion is he might run up the score with them in California as well. But it is also necessary to say that in Nevada, everybody is heavily unionized. It is also necessary to say that in Nevada, it's a much smaller state. I mean, the sample size itself is much smaller. So Sanders did lose California to Hillary Clinton in 2016. He spent a ton of money here. He spent about $7 million on ads, according to NPR. Biden has spent no money on California TV ads. He has spent $4,000 on digital ads. But apparently the early voting was fairly slow. Bloomberg is currently polling below the 15% threshold required to get delegates in all of these contests. Warren is teetering around the delegate threshold percentage too. The question is whether she gets 15%. Also, there were no exit polls in 2016. Black voters in 2008 in California were only 7% of the electorate, but the California Democratic Party is estimating the black Americans make up about 16% of the party in the state of California. So maybe they show up in heavy numbers. So what do the polls say about California? Well, the most recent poll is a poll from Emerson, and it does show Joe Biden surpassing that 15% delegate threshold, which is a big deal for Joe Biden. This is not about Biden winning California. It is about Biden showing up above the 15% delegate threshold, because were he to show up above that 15% delegate threshold, well, then he would win enough delegates to make some serious trouble for Bernie. Bernie needs to run away with California. He needs to win 300 delegates in California. And if there are three candidates who are above the delegate threshold, and right now that is where Warren is polling, she's also above the delegate threshold in a lot of these states, well, that is a problem for Bernie. There's a CBS YouGov poll that came out just before the South Carolina primaries, and that one only showed Sanders up 31-19 over Biden, and with Warren at 18. So, there, by the way, Bloomberg was getting 12, and Buttigieg was getting 7 to 9% of the vote in all of these polls. Right? So if Buttigieg was getting 7, and that 7 kicks over to Biden, suddenly Biden is looking a lot more viable in states like California. So that is where things stand in California. Bloomberg is running below 15%, but he is still pulling somewhere between 11 and 15%. How many moderate Democrats in California now look at Bloomberg and they go, okay, that guy can't win the nomination, but you know who can would be Joe Biden. So I think that Biden is going to overperform the polling in California. I think that Biden is going to perform 23 to 25% in California, which would be a big win for Biden. In Texas, the Democratic primary polling in Texas shows Sanders with a lead in the Real Clear Politics poll average. Again, the latest two polls in Texas, which does have a serious number of delegates, 228 delegates at stake. Polling shows that Sanders is up in average in the Real Clear Politics polling average about 6%. I don't think Sanders is going to win Texas. I think Biden's going to win Texas. I think that's going to be the big shock of the night, is that I do not think that Sanders is going to pull out Texas, because the fact is that Texas Democrats are still not as radical as the rest of the Democratic Party across the country. They're radical in Austin, but they're not radical anywhere else. Okay, right now the Emerson poll shows Sanders with 31 and Biden with 26 and Bloomberg at 16. I don't think Bloomberg is going to show at 16. I don't think Bloomberg is going to show at 13. I think Bloomberg is going to, I don't know that Bloomberg is going to break 10% in Texas. I think the big story of the night is Bloomberg is going to underperform and Biden's going to overperform. And now, hold me to my dumb prediction after it turns out I'm wrong about all this. You know, I would never put my own money on my own betting, because I did that in 2016. Didn't work out great for me. But I have a feeling that South Carolina, the media coverage, the fact that Biden's going to get a lot of big endorsements over the next 48 hours, I think that means that you're going to see Bloomberg start to collapse. Because again, the reason that Bloomberg was almost a placeholder. When people are polled about Bloomberg, it's a placeholder for Biden. It was people saying, okay, well, it was more referendum on Biden than it was on Bloomberg. So if people thought that Biden was going to collapse, they said, I'm going to vote for Bloomberg. If they think that Biden is going to not collapse, then they say, I'm going to vote for Biden. So all of these polls are not taking into account South Carolina. And the ones that are taking into account South Carolina are showing a significant bump for Joe Biden. Right? That Emerson poll, the ones that came out, they were done on Saturday and then through Sunday. Those polls are showing Biden significantly outperforming the other polls. And that's not taking into account his South Carolina victory, except for one day of the poll, that Emerson poll. That's showing Biden up at 26%, again, to Sanders' 31. Even the CBS News YouGov poll in Texas shows Sanders up 30 to 26 over Biden. Well, what about 3 days of great coverage for Joe Biden? What about 3 days of Joe Mentum coverage for Joe Biden? I think Biden's going to pull out Texas. I think that Biden is going to overperform in Texas, which is real trouble for Bernie Sanders. Then you get to North Carolina. North Carolina, the problem for Bernie in North Carolina is that black voters represent about a third of the electorate. 61% of voters in North Carolina are 45 and older. Okay, so both groups do favor Biden. The percentages of both are lower in North Carolina than in South Carolina. But right now, the polling in North Carolina is not reflective of reality. It just isn't. Okay, the polling in North Carolina right now shows Biden up only 4 points on Sanders, according to East Carolina U. That came out before the South Carolina results. That's before the South Carolina results. Remember, in the polling averages for South Carolina, Biden was only winning about 35 to 40% of the vote. He showed 48% of the vote in South Carolina, significantly outperformed. He outperformed the 538 estimates by 8 percentage points in South Carolina. I think you're going to see the same thing in North Carolina. I think you're going to see Biden walk all over Sanders in North Carolina. I think you're going to see that Bloomberg vote collapse. I think you're going to see Biden easily surpass 30% in North Carolina. I think it's going to be more like 35% in North Carolina. When it comes to Massachusetts, I think Sanders is going to win Massachusetts walking away. I do not think it's going to be that close. Right now, the polls show Sanders and Warren very close in Massachusetts, which is another big prize. I think Sanders is going to do much better because I think that the Bernie bros are going to really mobilize there. Not only are they really going to mobilize, I think that the Warren crowd is going to realize that she has no shot at the nomination. So while she may do okay, I don't think that she is going to be competitive with Bernie. I think that Bernie takes that state by 5 points. And then I think you move on to Minnesota, which is another delegate-heavy state. There, I think that Bernie wins, but narrowly. I think that Klobuchar does show in Minnesota she is very popular in her home state in a way that Elizabeth Warren isn't. Elizabeth Warren, dirty little secret, Elizabeth Warren ain't that popular in Massachusetts, at least not more popular than any normal Democrat. It's not like she's wildly more popular than whatever placeholder Democrat had held that Senate seat before. Okay, Virginia is another state with a heavy black population. Virginia has 99 delegates at stake. Unite the Country, a super PAC supporting Biden, believes Biden is starting to do well, not just with black voters, but with white women over the age of 40. Okay, that probably is true because Bernie does not do particularly well. There are not a lot of good polls out of Virginia. The Virginia polling is very weak right now. All we know in Virginia is that the latest Democrat polls from Virginia had Sanders and Bloomberg and Biden basically within spitting distance of one another. That was conducted before Bloomberg's first debate in Las Vegas and before Joe Biden won South Carolina. So I think that Hillary Clinton won 2/3 of white women in Virginia, and she ran all over Bernie in Virginia. So I think that Biden is going to, I think if you had to ballpark this thing, assume that Biden is going to perform very much like Hillary Clinton did in 2016. Okay, on Super Tuesday, she ran up a delegate lead in 2016. I think that Biden is going to underperform Hillary in places like California and New York and Massachusetts, but I think that he is going to perform almost exactly like Hillary in a lot of these southern states. Colorado is a heavily Latino state, about 67 delegates at stake in Colorado. Again, not fantastic polling from a lot of these states. Colorado is another one where there's just not that many, not that great polling. But with that said, it is super. Is it plausible that it's competitive in some place like Colorado? Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly plausible. So bottom line is that it is a mess right now, but that mess is not necessarily cutting in Bernie's favor. So all the talk last week was that Bernie was going to run away with this thing in very short order. I'm not seeing a lot of evidence that that's going to happen. I think that I think Biden's going to overperform. I think that Bernie's going to perform exactly like he thought. I think Bloomberg is going to be the real story. I think Bloomberg is going to collapse. I think contact between voters and Bloomberg is toxic for Bloomberg. By the way, I'm not mentioning Tennessee, where I think Biden's really going to run up the score. I'm not mentioning Alabama, where I think Biden's really going to run up the score. Oklahoma, where I think Biden is going to run up the score. Arkansas, where he's going to run up the score. Utah, I think that you're going to see Sanders win. Maine, you're going to see Sanders win. Vermont, you're going to see Sanders win. But it is not implausible to believe that Joe Biden walks away from Super Tuesday, if he doesn't have a delegate lead because of California, at the very least, he is very, very close after Super Tuesday. And then we move on to a bunch of states that are very, very conducive for the current former Democratic vice president, right? We move into the rest of the primary calendar looks a lot better for Joe Biden than it does for Bernie Sanders. I'm looking at the presidential election calendar right now. So here's how it goes after Super Tuesday. March 10th, you get Idaho, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, Washington. Washington is good for Bernie. North Dakota is probably good for Bernie. Idaho is probably good for Bernie. Michigan, probably good for Bernie, maybe not. That could be Biden territory. Mississippi and Missouri, very, very good for Joe Biden. And then you move on to March 17th, Arizona, which could be good for Bernie, but Florida, which is awful for Bernie. Ohio, which is probably not great for Bernie. And Illinois, which is probably not great for Bernie, because Chicago's in Illinois, right? So the fact is that this race starts as the time goes on, and as Joe Biden remains competitive, this race starts to tilt slowly toward Joe Biden and away from Bernie Sanders. So there's a reason 538's got the open convention possibility at a 65%. 65%. And by the way, in terms of their majority of delegates, they're showing Bernie at just a 21% to get it and a 14% for Joe Biden. So basically, they're running pretty close to even. In their average number of delegates they expect to be won, again, Bernie Sanders 1612, Biden 1449. They're expecting Bloomberg to win 591. I think that's an overestimate of Bloomberg. I think Bloomberg is going to fall apart. I think Bloomberg, and I think the ads that Bloomberg is taking out are largely going to be directed not against Joe Biden. They're going to be directed against Bernie Sanders. So I would suspect that at least 200 of the delegates that are being allocated to Bloomberg right now are instead going to cut up to Joe Biden. So quite plausible that Biden is your leader in the clubhouse, that he wins a plurality of delegates, which is that is the best case scenario for the Democrats, by the way. The best case scenario for the Democrats is that Biden has a plurality of the delegates going into the convention. That is best case scenario. And it's not implausible. It's not implausible. We're going to know so much more after tomorrow night, after Super Tuesday. But like I say, this whole thing has been about momentum. Bernie has not been able to run up the score except in Nevada. Nevada is the only state where he ran up the score. In Iowa, he underperformed. In New Hampshire, he underperformed. He lost to Pete Buttigieg in Iowa. He barely beat Pete Buttigieg in New Hampshire, and Pete Buttigieg is out of the race. Now that you have an actual Democratic candidate in Joe Biden who has actual minority support and older voter support, I said 2 weeks ago, I thought that Bernie was unstoppable. That was before South Carolina. South Carolina made an awful lot of difference. And tomorrow night, we are going to find out just how much of a difference all of that made. Facts don't care about your feelings, and it's a fact that The Ben Shapiro Show is the largest conservative podcast in the nation. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on all of our content.